Hi, people. I'm just joining in, so I'm looking for Saltwave Spanish Moss. She may not be on quite yet. Hello, hello, hi. Can you hear me all right? It's raining outside, and my cordless earphones are not with me. Hi, everybody. Hello, hello. I just opened this up, so. Oh, it sounds good. Thank you for letting me know. What is that? Yes, seriously? Seriously, that's funny. Cool, cool. It's raining there too. Yeah, I'm so glad that it's raining, because we needed some rain. Jimothy's out right now. He's with my partner, and they're playing D&D. Jimothy, I did get this. I did channel once for Jimothy during a D&D game because I don't. Nothing against D&D. Never really called to me. But he wanted to play, so I just channeled for him. Like I said what he would say in the character, like he chose his character and everything. Maybe we'll do that for a live sometime. I'm so serious. Like maybe I'll just we'll play a one shot D&D and I'll go live for Jimothy or as Jimothy's spoken voice, because the group the group I was with, they were like, what? Like some of them knew of Jimothy, and then others were like, you're talking for a ghost? I was like, yeah. Welcome to my life. Aloha. Hello, South Texas. Am I able to see other spirits if you ask them to see me? In theory. It's all, I say in theory because I'm better when I'm like there in person. So, and it's also the spirit, their personal decision who they want to be seen by, I guess. Thank you for that. I just saw. Thank you. I'm gonna see if I can. There we go. I'm gonna add in. Hello.
Hey!
I'm gonna turn this up. It is pouring. Like all of a sudden, it was like, "Hey, we're gonna pour here for this live."
It's been raining all day in Savannah.
Oh, I wonder if it's the same front. Like there was like this like big storm system that was just going
I think
north.
so.
Yeah. Wow. It's like we're connected. How wonderful. Well, let's see. Thanks everybody who's already joining in, and I would like for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Enocha. I live in Savannah, Georgia, and last year I started investigating Savannah's weird and haunted history.
That was only last year when you started that?
hmm
Wow. See, you like when you speak and in your videos and like all the information that you give out, I was just like, "Oh, clearly she's been doing this for like 10 years."
Well, I mean, I worked in news for a really long time, and I've lived in Savannah since 2010, minus like a year and a half in Houston that we don't talk about because it's terrible.
I understand that. There are a few cities where I don't know if it's the city's fault. It could have been mine, or maybe we just agreed to not get along with each other, and that was that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you vibe with certain places, and for me, Savannah's been that place that I vibe with.
Yeah, that's like, okay, that's like how I am in Wilmington. I've been meaning to do, it's like this astrological thing where like you put your signs like on a map or something. Like there's a app or like a website that does it for you, but like basically your signs drop down over geographical points, and supposedly that's where you would vibe. So
Huh.
clearly Houston is not vibe, but Savannah
No.
is vibe. That's like how I feel with Wilmington. I'm like, I don't know how I wound up here, but I'm so happy to be here. Well, cool. I have questions that I just wanted to ask you. And I will start because I know some of this because like we've talked on the phone a few times before. But when going to Savannah, can you share with people, like, what was the thing that you were like, whoa, this is actually haunted, like, there are actually ghosts here? What, do you have, like, a memory or a
Um,
pinpoint?
Well, when I first came to Savannah, so like I said, I worked in news, and I've been working for a station in Panama City, Florida. And one of my reporter friends who I'd worked with moved to Savannah and got a job up here. And about the same time that my contract was expiring for my other position, he said, "Hey, we're looking for producers up here. You should apply. You'd be really good." And so I did. I came up for a job interview and made like a little weekend of it. And she was showing me around downtown, and she was like, "And this place is haunted, and this place is haunted, and this place is also haunted." And I was just like, if you could just point out the buildings that aren't haunted, I feel like that would take less time. And so I knew like Savannah had a weird history moving in here. I got the job. I found an apartment in an old Victorian house. And the house had been split up into 3 apartments. Downstairs was 1 apartment. Upstairs was 2. 1 on the front, 1 on the back. I had the back apartment. And I was moving everything in, and my neighbor from across the hall came over to introduce himself. And he said, "Just so you know, this house is haunted." I was like, "Oh, okay, that's cool."
Yep.
And he was like, "But don't worry, he stays in my apartment most of the time. He might wander into yours. I just want to give you a heads up in case he does." And he told me his name, but I never had to deal with him while my neighbor was there. So I forgot his name. And then my neighbor moved out. And every once in a while, when that apartment was vacant, the ghost would like come and peek in to see what was going on. I never saw him, but my cats always alerted me that somebody was there. And so I didn't remember his name, so I just called him Bob. And I would look up from whatever I was doing, say, "Hey, Bob," and just keep going.
What did he look like?
I didn't see him, but the upstairs apartments had a shared staircase that was only accessible for people who lived upstairs. And every once in a while, when that apartment was vacant, my cats would stop and look at the door that led into the hallway with the shared staircase. There was no one out there.
No one physical.
Like
yeah.
Somebody just walked in.
Like, did you personally ever get the feeling like where you were in a room, like clearly the cats were giving you like the telltale, but did you ever get that feeling where it's like you don't have to see, but it's just like someone else is in here? Did you ever get that?
I never felt like I was alone in that building, but that's also because the walls are really thin. So it just felt like a communal household.
Yeah. There are a lot of those kinds of duplexes in historic Wilmington as well. And it's fascinating when people are like, yeah, our room has been split in half. Like the original room was split in half and there's just somebody who walks through the wall like every day, like that's so-and-so who used to own the house. No, I love that. There have been a few questions on my end asking about the CVS, which I think you did a video on the CVS. Can you enlighten us what's going on with that CVS?
Yeah, so the haunted CVS is in downtown Savannah. It's off of Wright Square. And before any of the modern buildings that we see now, Wright Square always had a courthouse on it, always. It had a courthouse, it had a jail, and it had a cemetery. Now, we know where the cemetery was because they found bodies during an excavation. Sometimes you just find bodies when you're working on buildings in Savannah.
Yeah. Yep, same thing in Wilmington.
We know where the courthouse was. I'm not 100% on where the jail is. I've gone through old maps of Savannah and haven't figured out where on the square it is, but a lot of people theorize it's where the CVS is now. And that CVS is super haunted. It's one of those places that closes early. Most CVSs will stay open till like 10 in the evening. That one closes, I think, at 8. But it's very active. I haven't spoken personally to anyone who's had an encounter there. But I was just talking to one of my friends who was downtown, needed to use a restroom, ran into the CVS and asked where the restroom was. And she said that the salesperson said, so it's in the basement and you do not want to go down there by yourself. And my friend was like, but I really have to go. Like, I really have to go. So the salesperson was really nice and walked her down there, stayed right outside the door the entire time. And my friend said that she was super uncomfortable, not because of the salesperson, just because there was, like, she definitely felt like there was something else down there that she couldn't see. But the salesperson didn't go into any detail about, like, what happens down there, just that that's not a place you want to go. In fact, the salesperson told her that even they don't like going down there. They will go, like, across the street, down a couple of buildings to use a restroom there rather than go to that one.
Wow. You know, I feel for that salesperson because clearly something happened to her. Like, she has seen some stuff that she likely has not been paid properly for.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. And I think too, with port cities, the concept of basements, I know it's more common when you get up the hill. Like, basically Wilmington is on a big sand dune that has since, you know, rooted and has trees on it over thousands of years. And that's why it's so old, because a bunch of people came in and they were like, oh, there's a higher elevation here. The water is really deep. Okay, this will be really good for a town. And so they build the town, and there are some basements a little farther up. I know closer to the river, it's harder to have them. At the same time, the places that I do know that have basements, it is kind of the same thing, because our oldest graveyard oldest recognized graveyard only dates back to the early 1700s. And there have been people settling here since the I would say early 1600s. So that's clearly almost 100 years of time where people have clearly been buried somewhere, but they're not being recognized as to where they were buried. And so it's the same thing. They will break ground downtown. I've seen this happen where they break ground and then all of a sudden they stop construction and all these white tents go up. And that's when you know they found something not so good. They actually started the forensic science lab at Wilmington, the University of Wilmington. It was started because the police were overwhelmed with the amount of bones that they were finding during development in the 1980s. And so they figured, oh, we can train the students and basically get this work done a lot cheaper if we get like some grants going to the school for this. And so now a lot of that is student-led.
Yeah, the cemetery on Wright Square that I mentioned that they rediscovered when they were doing some development there. I was recently watching an interview with one of the historians in Savannah, and she was saying that that's when they discovered there had been a cemetery there. There's a plaque there that marks that there had been a cemetery, but they don't know what happened to the remains afterwards, because that happened in the 1950s, and people weren't as big on honoring the dead and reinterring things properly back then. So, not sure where those went.
Yeah.
Maybe they're still under the building.
Yeah. I know in New Bern, there was a cemetery. It's where I forget what it's called. It's like this big archway that's made with local seashells and sand, and so it's very porous. And the whole thing is, if you go through the archway and get a raindrop on you or like a droplet of water, it signals you're going to die. So, like, of course, everybody walks through the archway. Yeah. I walked under the archway, did not get wet. I also, after that, I was like, I'm just going to use one of the other entrances to this burial ground. Like, I don't need to do that.
That's to be safe.
I did it for TikTok. I was like, okay, everybody, let's go through the thing. Anyway, totally fine, totally calm. But I know with that burial ground, it felt so awful in there. And I found out later after doing research that it had been initially a burial ground towards like the late 1800s into the early 1900s. They had put black and white people next to each other. They had buried them next to each other. And at that time, it was before Jim Crow like really became embedded into the South. And it was after that was implemented, they started to dig up these people of color and put them in like plots across the street. And I didn't know this when I was going through the cemetery, but I just kept getting this awful, awful feeling of just like something is wrong. Like something has been overturned. Something just, there are spirits there that are just very, very unhappy. And I think, at least on that kind of perspective, you know, the town is still like trying to figure out exactly what to do and how to like honor all these souls without like having a mass, you know, digging up of everybody and trying to figure all of that out. But I think about just having something as simple as a plaque, like what you're talking about, with like recognizing that people were buried here and they were important, and we should at least understand that that happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's an old burial ground here in Savannah, Georgia. Dawn, to answer your question, I'm in Savannah, Georgia, and Rebekah's up in North Carolina. But 432 Abercorn is one of the more popular haunted houses on the ghost tours in Savannah. And of course, a whole bunch of different stories about what happened here, none of which are true. But the square that it's on, Calhoun Square, that area was developed in the 1850s. And prior to that, that area through nearby Whitfield Square would have been the burial grounds for enslaved and free Black people. Mm-hmm. And it didn't matter, you know, if you had any money or no money, that is where you would have been buried. And so when they were going to develop that area, they moved all the bodies that they could find. But, you know, this is back before ground penetrating radar. So you're going off of, you know, dips in the ground and any headstones or markers that you can find. And if those people didn't have any money, they wouldn't have had any markers, or they wouldn't have had markers that lasted very well. So there are still bodies in that area, and there's nothing there that marks it as an old burial ground. Nothing.
Yeah.
There's no signs, there's no memorials, absolutely nothing there. And you can feel that energy when you're in the area, because they want to be acknowledged.
Mm-hmm. I think too, I don't always think that it's like literally everybody, like every single soul is like, oh, we got to come back. We got to, you know, be around and like tell people. Sometimes I think it's like a guardian spirit that is like, hey, I've been hanging out, you know, protecting these people for so long. And then all of a sudden, you know, ground is broken and nothing is acknowledged. And all of a sudden they're doing whatever they can do to say, hey, don't be here, or, you know, acknowledge. And that's why, you know, some people, they'll get this feeling of nausea, or they'll get like a headache or something when they're in a place where the spirit is very much like either acknowledge or get out. Yep. I've gotten that feeling a number of times in a number of places. People are saying hi everybody. Yeah, I am reading some of the comments as I can. Goodness, yeah, that's the thing. I love history because it teaches us so much about, you know, how we can be better as a society from learning from our past. But goodness, it sure can be painful, because a number of people in my comment section are talking about similar circumstances in their respective towns. And
oh yeah, it's happened a lot. When I was still working in news, I remember running a story from Tampa where almost overnight this apartment complex was built up over an old cemetery in a historically Black part of town. And it wasn't until decades later that somebody was clued into, oh, hey, yeah, there used to be a cemetery here. And so work is finally being done to honor those people now. But at the time, there wasn't anything. No one cared.
Yeah, it's devastating. But hey, I think that's why it's important to have these conversations and to acknowledge, you know, it's fascinating. I think people, they look at the ghost tour guide, right? And they're like, oh, hey, but you're talking about ghosts. So like, what validity is this? And I'm like, actually, yeah, exactly. I feel it. You know this, like there is validity, because why would a spirit stick around if they didn't have something to say, you know? Unless, of course, it's a
I've got
residual
a
energy.
question. I've got a question on my end. Gray Girl wants to know how the petition to change the square names is progressing. I haven't heard anything about it recently, and I do keep checking on it, but nothing's been done. Every time I walk through that square, I look to see if something has changed there, or in Whitfield Square, nothing's changed. There are two women who have been trying to push for Calhoun and Whitfield Squares to be renamed because both of them are named after huge racists. So if you're not going to put up a monument, the least you could do is rename them.
Yeah, something similar in Wilmington, that there's been a resurgence of people wanting acknowledgement for the coup d'etat that happened in 1898. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Okay, so this is something I do think should have been taught in every school, and was not. And I take personal problem with it, having grown up in North Carolina, and I didn't learn about it until much later in my life. But the only successful overthrow of the United States government happened in Wilmington, and it was never overturned. And this, this happened in 1898, and it was largely taken off the record books because basically once these essentially white supremacists got what they wanted, they put a bunch of statues up of themselves, they named a bunch of streets, they took a bunch of property, and then they were like, oh, the president's not going to do anything? Because basically the president of the time, he was like, oh, I'll leave it to the governor to do something. The governor did not do anything. And so a legally elected government in Wilmington, which was a higher percentage black at that time, because their Reconstruction movement was phenomenal going on down here in Wilmington, they were thrown out. They were thrown out forcefully. Many people were killed. Many people were driven out. And it was a truly dark day in history. And so many people had forgotten about it up until the centennial. It was like the 100-year anniversary. And a small group of people in Wilmington, so this was in 1998, a small group of people in Wilmington, both black and white, got together and they said, hey, we should talk about this. Like, we should have a panel and we should talk about this because people don't seem to know what happened. And so this small panel gets together and they start talking about this and they're like, okay, well, what do you know about this? Well, how do we find out more? Where was this information? Why don't we know where it is? Some of the local school children don't know. Like, a lot of locals still don't know. And these are people who were raised here. And so they're getting together, they're finding more information, they're working together. And in a short amount of time, they start to publish the things that had happened and how terrible they were. And things are still going slowly. We recently got a plaque to recognize in as much as you can fit on a small plaque on a highway marker sign, to recognize that overthrow of government and how many people were murdered. But even still, there are scorch marks all over town, like places that still haven't even been rebuilt. One of the places where all of this started, it was a newspaper building. It was a black newspaper building, and they burned it down because the man was expressing his freedom of speech, and they did not like that, and so they burned it down. And to this day, it's still an empty lot. And I think that says something about the power of spirit, whether it's like something ghostly or whether it's just like that residual kind of energy. It's almost as if there's just things that are not working in order to develop that lot. And it's now in a pretty solid place of town. So it's kind of like, okay, we're using it for a parking lot, but it's just a dirt lot. I mean, there's got to be something else at play there. And I think there will be until there's further recognition as to what happened and the wrong that was done.
Agreed.
So, and that's the coup d'etat of 1898. Look it up. I can tell you many books and videos and all kinds of stuff, but woof. Yeah, I should not be the one to just explain that. I can give teasers, but there are other people who do it much better than I do. So go look it up. The coup d'etat of 1898. So, okay, question for you, and this was another thing. So, have you officially started doing your ghost tours yet?
Not officially. I've done some test groups where people who follow me on TikTok and Instagram have reached out saying that they were coming into town. And so I've shown them around, not in any sort of official capacity, but just to get an idea of what route I want and which stories I want to include. But my goal is to get everything launched by October 1st.
October 1st? Oh, that's so soon.
Yes.
That's so exciting. I can't wait.
Neither can I.
So I'm curious as far as your route in, because I've done a few ghost tours or led a few ghost tours between Wilmington and Washington D.C. And some of them do like 5 stops where it's like all the information, and some of them do like 10 stops where it's a little bit less information. Like what are you looking to do? Like how many stops? What's your idea with all of this?
I'm I'm starting up a private tour company. So let's say that you and Jay came to visit and you booked me. It would just be you and Jay. There would be nobody else on the tour.
Okay.
So that way it's a little bit more intimate, and we can kind of base it off of how my guests are feeling. Like if they're tired and they're like, oh no, we want to wrap this up, or hey, we're really thirsty, or we need to use a restroom. Can we duck in here real quick? So it's just sort of playing it by ear. And since I'm a giant nerd, I know way too much about a lot of things in Savannah, so I can spend as much time as we want in front of one location, or just completely skip it and move on to the next place.
Ooh, see, that is really exciting to me because I love history, and I know you know your history, and that's why, like, whenever I find a ghost guide that's like, no, but actually the history is more interesting than some farcical whatever.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah. So that's dangerous. If you run into people like me, I'm just gonna be like, no, we're good. What do you want a beer? I'll buy you a beer, and then we can go back out, right? Like that's fine, yeah. Oh, well, I am very excited. Like, where do you start out? Where are you thinking about starting out? Or is that going to change nightly as well?
It might change. I told the city I wanted to start in Oglethorpe Square, which is close to the Lucas Theater, just for anybody who's slightly familiar with Savannah but doesn't know where all the squares are. It's not the square that the Lucas is on. It's like one down. But I picked that square because I didn't think it was going to be as busy as some of the other squares in town. But the last couple of nights that I've gone there, it's been packed with ghost tours. Not as bad as, say, Wright Square. I definitely didn't want to start in Wright Square because there's only so much space to stand in that square. You've got a giant monument, and then you've got, like, all of these bushes and stuff in that area, and the marker for Tomachichi. So there's not a lot of space to stand there, and a lot of ghost tours have been meeting there. So I picked Oglethorpe Square because it's more grassy, but that might change.
Okay. That's so exciting. Seriously, I'm like, yeah. Now, are you looking to just like continue to do these after the October season?
Yeah, I'm going to be offering them year round.
Okay, great. Because, you know, it's long time overdue for Jay and me to get down there. So I'm like, well, we won't be coming in October, but that November, December slot, like, our work really dries up around here. So I'm like, okay, well, pandemic willing, I guess I should say, with everything.
Yeah.
That's what happened this past spring with Jay and me being like, oh, we want to get down there. Like, we want to keep going. We want to keep traveling. And we were like, yeah, we're going to stay back until we're vaccinated, and then we'll do some, and then we just came to Wilmington. So,
Yeah.
oh, that is exciting. Yeah, Jay and I were actually talking about we're waiting to get some more historical references. The Bellevue Cemetery, which I know when I say Bellevue, I think you're thinking of something, because there's you have a Bellevue something in Savannah, right?
No.
Okay.
Not that I can think of.
Where am I thinking of? Maybe it's Charleston. Anybody from Charleston? No, like Bellevue. Anyway, it's a name. So Bellevue Cemetery is often overlooked, and it's a little bit farther from downtown Wilmington. They built it near a creek, And Bellevue Cemetery, it's not the ritzy cemetery. Basically, there's this other cemetery that was built. It was just after the Civil War, and it's the more ritzy cemetery. And so, like, everybody knows of it, and the ghosts are really famous, and it's super pretty. And I've done a few episodes from there. However, there's Bellevue Cemetery that is where the more common folk went. And I'm not sure if it was only white. I want to say that there was some white and black people who were there, but certainly these were the more working class. These were lower class that could actually afford a plot. And we're more interested in telling their stories because I feel like they so often, you know, they're not the famous and the glitzy and, you know, like all of the stuff that, you know, I feel like so many people know about. They are the working class. And we're working with a local historian on getting those stories right to basically be able to go out into that cemetery, tell historically accurate stories, and then go into, okay, so let's see, does this person want to, you know, communicate or, you know, also teaching spiritual ethics? Like, just, it's going to be, it's not just a tour. It's like part experience. We're like encouraging people like, bring your spirit boxes. Just put an earphone in because I don't want to hear that the whole time. And try not to freak out when things happen. That's another big thing. I'm like, please try not to freak out. It's going to happen. We'll all be excited about it. But you freaking out, it's just going to send me being like, yeah, somebody said hi. Isn't that cool? It's like they're here. Wow. Now, I'm curious. Yeah. With your tours, and you're still new with these, but I trust that you've been around these areas with, you know, just friends before. Like, have you ever had something happen where, I mean, have you ever been disillusioned to it before to be like, yeah, somebody said hi? Like, has that ever happened to you?
So I don't want to throw shade at any of the ghost tours in Savannah because everybody has like their own thing that they do, and that's great. Like, different people go on ghost tours for different reasons. And some people want the like paranormal investigation stuff, and some people want more of the legends and less of the history. So like everybody's got their thing that fits with whatever people want. I went on one ghost tour that I will not name, and the entire time the guy who was our guide had a ghost box, and we'd stop at every single place that he was telling us about, and we'd wait to see if something came across the ghost box. And it was really awkward. And we had stopped in front of the Pulaski Monument. And a lot of people forget that Georgia was part of the British colonies. And during the Revolutionary War, the only Revolutionary battle fought in Georgia was fought in Savannah, the Siege of Savannah. We actually just a few days ago would have been the anniversary for the start of the siege, which lasted several weeks. And during that battle, Casimir Pulaski, who was Polish but was fighting on the American side, was mortally wounded and died. And his remains were buried out where Greenwich Cemetery is now, and were later reinterred right in front of his monument. They did DNA testing and proved that it was him. So we had waited there. Guy's got his little spirit box out. And one of my friends who was with me speaks Polish. And the guy was like, oh, say something to him in Polish. And so she said, like, hi, my name is, and how are you doing tonight? And a little while later, we heard, okay, come across the box. And he was like, he said okay. And we were like, he's a Revolutionary War hero, and all he has to say is okay.
Yeah. I also, well, okay. I wonder if that was like a passerby person because, and maybe you know about this, I actually looked up the origins for okay. Like when we started using that in our like
around for a really long time.
Yeah, but it didn't come around until, to my understanding, post-revolutionary times. It was a way for this, like, I don't know if it was the Masons, like the Freemasons, but it was like a higher-up gentleman's club. And their way of saying, are you going to be at the club? They'd be like, are you okay? And it was a, like, O standing for something and K standing for something. but that didn't come about until later. That's the thing. I love the origins of words because, you know, depending on who you're talking to, that will directly affect the vernacular that they're using, especially when we have this technology, right? Or when the technology
And
gets really
then,
confused.
yeah. And I've been back to the Pulaski Monument plenty of times, and there's definitely like a lot of energy in that area. That's also where the Mercer House from Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil is. But I've never like tried to tap into anything over there because almost every single time that I'm over there, there's a bunch of people because it's a very popular square because of the Mercer House.
Yeah. It's so fascinating too, like how different it is in Savannah as far as the tourism around the historic homes and the haunts within them and around them. Because Wilmington is not really recognized for just how haunted and how historic it is. Like our historic district, basically what happened was the town was nearly wiped off after, well, after the coup d'etat, when most of your workforce is shoved out. Suddenly you don't have workers and your economy drops concepts.
Yep.
And then after that, we were a port city that turned into a port city that relied on the railroad. Then the railroad pulled out in the 60s. And so that took a third of the town. And then suddenly the rest of the town was like, oh, well, that was everything. So what do we do? So the town was in this state of decay up until the 1980s. And in that point, that is when the film industry came to town. Before there was Atlanta for filming, there was Wilmington, North Carolina for filming. And that actually saved so much. And the houses were so old at that point that they were like, oh, we just have to restore them because we can't just destroy them. And that's why our historic district is just huge. You just walk and walk and walk, and it goes on and goes on. Like for 20 blocks from the riverfront, which for Wilmington being smaller, it's like that's a big deal. But with that, it's fascinating. Like when I came to Wilmington, I didn't know it was haunted. I didn't know it was so history based. Like I didn't know any of this. But then to have the experiences that I've had and to see other people have these experiences with ghosts, I'm sitting here scratching my head because I'm like, whoa, we're right up there with Savannah and with Charleston. Like there's so much wild stuff going on back here. And like you don't even have to try for most of it. You show up in one spot and you're like, somebody's throwing up because they don't feel good. That's because dead people are here, you know, like that's it. So it's fascinating to hear the perspective from someone in Savannah where you do have all of that tourism and you do have so many tours. Like, do you know how many ghost tours there are?
When I asked somebody from the city, they said there was around 20. And I don't know if she was including like the hearse tours and the trolley tours or if that was just walking tours.
And is that all roughly in the same area?
Yeah.
That sounds kind of like a nightmare, not gonna lie.
And that's why I've been doing test runs because like there are some really popular spots like the Mercer House. So I don't want to be one of those tours that's like on top of like 3 other tours at the same time. So I'm trying to get the timing right.
Yeah. And understanding their timing and oh my goodness. Yeah, like in Wilmington, there's one main ghost tour and they basically have a monopoly and all the guides, like sometimes 20 groups will go out each night. And they all have different tours, and those can be upwards of 30 people per tour. I'm not sure what their numbers are since they reopened, but even they, knowing different stops, I remember I think there were about 30 different stops total that basically we could pick from. We did 5 a night, and I knew about 22 of them at the time that I decided to go. But even then, you know, it's great to kind of make my tour up on the fly because I'd go to one place and be like, oh, hey, look, there are 2 other groups there. We can go across the street and talk about this building because less people know about it. Hey, it's an old library. Isn't that cool? You know, like, but wow, 20 other tour groups, which I imagine they also have multiple guides. And that's a lot. That is a lot.
Yeah. And then, if you've got like a single tour company that has several different tours that go out the same night, they also stagger their times, and they also tend to pick different locations. Because for a while there, like I said, everyone was picking Wright Square, and Wright Square, there's not much place to stand.
Yeah. But I think that also makes what you're looking to do even more appealing because, you can weave in and out. Like if you've got to take a back alley to get somewhere, it's not like you have 20 people trailing behind you. If you have to cross the street, you can cross it all together before the light changes. Like that's pretty cool. I really like that take on it.
I've got a couple of comments I wanted to get to on my end.
Yeah.
We already talked about 432 Abercorn, so sorry I'll miss that. Hello to everyone who just joined. Spooky Stuff is on here. And I got a comment from someone saying that their town in New Jersey is like that on Delaware River. They have so much history, and they're a psychic medium, so it's interesting to experience what they've experienced on their own property.
Yeah. Yeah, I got lost in my comments a little bit. Hi, everybody. To everybody who said that they enjoy my content, I'm just going to say thank you because I lost a few of you, and I'm like, well, I appreciate you. I see you. I just wasn't immediately able to say that, so yay. Cool. So, okay, here's a question. With there being so many other ghost tours, what was the thing that led you to say, I'm going to do my own?
Most of the other ghost tours, there are a few that offer private tours, but not a lot. Mm-hmm. And coming out of the pandemic, everyone's kind of forgotten their social skills. And a lot of us have, like weird phobias because suddenly there's crowds and, you have this panic instinct that you've developed over the last year. And so like offering people a chance to enjoy those same things, but without the big crowd. I thought there was a market for that.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. I think of my partner, for example, who he is an extrovert and he, enjoys being around people, but it's this past year, like we tried going back out, when so many restrictions were lifted and we're like, we're fully vaccinated. Like, okay, and even still, it was just kind of like, whoa, there are so many people.
Yeah. I need to let my dog out real quick.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a baby, but I do have a dog.
Hey, I have a dog too. I think some of you may have seen her. Her butt is like kind of right there.
Also, I'm putting my glasses on because I can't read these comments.
I like your glasses. I think they're so much fun. So, okay, I know this is probably hard to pinpoint, but if you had to pick a favorite or two or three, what would you say your favorite spots are in Savannah for either the history and how it goes into the ghost story, or a place that you just love for whatever reason?
I love any excuse to talk about the Siege of Savannah, just because that's like a major thing that people will talk about a little bit in passing, but it definitely left like huge scars on the city. During that time, there was also a fire that wasn't like one of the big fires that came through, because we've had two of those. But it was big enough that it left an impact. And I also like talking about Colonial Park Cemetery, just because like anytime I'm in that area, if somebody really wants to experience something paranormal, that's almost a guaranteed. That place is so active. Like it's very rare that I've gone through there and not had something happen.
Okay, you have to say what's something that happened.
Well, actually, just recently, I brought two people over there, and we were talking about the cemetery. And there's a playground next to the cemetery, because of course there is. And that spot used to be a plant nursery long ago, because before it was mandated that you dig grave 6 feet, people were just like digging a grave and throwing a body in there. And then you've also got some crypts in there as well. So it was a very smelly place. And they put a plant nursery next to it to grow these fragrant bushes and trees that they could plant in the cemetery to help cover up the smell. And later on, when they didn't need the plant nursery, they put up the children's playground. And almost every time that I go past there, one of the swings will start to swing by itself. And there's a play set that a lot of people feel like they get something from. I've seen a lot of pictures of orbs, which I'm like, on orbs. But some people catch like weird figures near the play set. So I was telling them, like, if you want to take some pictures, this is a really good spot. And the woman who was with me could not get her camera to open. Her phone was freaking out. And she had used it just prior to us getting there, and she used it after we left there. Didn't have a problem with it. But while we were next to the cemetery, it would not open.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story or something that happened out of the Bergwin Wright house, which, if any of you are familiar with Rupert, he's around there. There was a girl, she had gotten her phone from South Korea, and in South Korea, all phones, when you take a picture, you can't turn off the sound, and that's for security, so that basically everybody knows when a picture's being taken, which I'm also like, that's probably not a terrible idea. You know, it gets annoying, but like, yeah, that way people know somebody's taken a picture. Like, I get that. So she had gotten her phone over there, and when she came back to the States, she just kept her phone and just changed out the SIM card. Well, she had taken a few photos on the tour, and she was so kind about it. She apologized a number of times. She's like, I'm sorry, I just want to take photos, but I understand if you don't want me to take photos because of the sound. Like, she's like, I don't want to mess you up. It's a South Korea thing. I was like, okay. So she was super kind about it, and it was at the Bergwin Wright house. We were around the garden side, which there is so much going on there. It was not always a garden. There was just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of death. And she, pulls out her phone to take a picture, and she clicks it, and no sound comes from it. And when she gets it back, she's like looking at it, and it's kind of like this blurry stuff going on. And then she was like, wait, that's weird. Like, my phone has to make this noise. And she's like, it's always made this noise. There's nothing wrong with my phone. And of course I'm like, maybe your phone decided to not make the noise. Like, there's the logic side of me. I'm not going to sit there and be like,
right,
clearly it's a ghost. I'm not that kind of person. I know people who are like, everything is a ghost. And I'm like, that would be so cool. But no, she's taking photos, and each one of her photos, it's like the shutter speed is really messed up. Like, it's just super, super slow. And so, like, you see, like, these weird lights in some of them, which, with a slow shutter speed, sure, that could just be the effect of the light. But it was the weirdest thing, and she just, like, didn't know what to do for the longest time. And I was like, okay, well, if it's a spirit, maybe we should ask the spirit to maybe back off a little bit so that you can have your camera back. And she was like, oh, well, I didn't think about that. She was like, and she's, kind of nervous, like with her phone. She's like, hey, spirit person, if you could maybe back up so that my phone will work again, maybe I can get a photo of you. And get this, after that happens, she holds up her camera again, the sound comes back, and the shutter speed is normal. It's like nothing had even happened.
Huh.
Yeah. So, sure.
I will have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, like, could be coincidence, sure. Like, I like to consider myself a logical person at the end of the day, but, like, at the same time, like, I've done lives before this has happened with Jimothy before, too, where I'll be doing a live, and, like, sometimes they get too close to the camera, and it messes with the frequency. This happened live. This is before I had met Jimothy, but this happened at St. James Graveyard, which is the oldest recognized burial ground. So, but no, we went live. It was Jay and me. And basically it felt like a number of people had just come right in. And we're explaining, we're like, hey, we're on this live. If you want to walk behind us or something like that, you're welcome to do so. And really they were just interested in the camera because they were like, wait, there's people in there. Like, how does that work? They were so excited about it. But every time they got really close, the signal just messed up. And so we had to repeatedly ask for them to back up a little bit. And every time that we did that, it was fascinating to see all the commenters because they're like, oh, we're good. Oh, there's a face behind you. Oh, we're good. Yep. It was so cool.
It is cool. Someone on my side asked for our first spooky experiences while giving or going on a tour.
The first one?
Mm-hmm. Like the first thing that you've experienced on a tour.
Ooh. I'm really having to like look through the log, being like, wow, how far do I go back? Because I did tours in DC, which DC, I always tell people, I'm like, if you ever want an explanation of why the United States is the way it is, take a ghost tour of the Capitol building. Take a ghost tour of the, like that whole square around there. And you learn a lot about a lot of drama that could have been let go, but no, we have spirits still fighting and debating to this day.
Drama in DC? No.
No. And drama that lasts like hundreds of years after people passed? No. Stop. Yeah. But in Wilmington, I remember the first time I went on the ghost tour, I had an experience. And, you know, I'm just going on the ghost tour because I'm like, it's the dark side of the history tour that they don't tell you on the history tour. You know, like, let's hear the dark stuff, you know. But we went up to Gallows Hill, which is where they used to execute people after they were tried and found guilty. And then they wouldn't know where to send these bodies off to because it meant a lot of them were sailors. So they would just bury them there. Mm-hmm. And then over time, the city expanded. Oh, it's a great plot of land. Let's put a house on it. A bunch of people, upwards of 200 people just there. So I didn't know any of this. And we had done like most of the tours towards the end. I get on the property, and this was before I knew a lot about like spiritual protecting and like shielding and that kind of thing. I was reawakening to all of this stuff. So I was just like, oh, this will be fun. So we get on the property and I'm having great issues even hearing what the tour guide is saying because I'm trying to keep down my guts at that point. Like I want to actively hurl and I feel like something's even shoving me from behind and I'm just like the whole time. Finally the story is done and I'm trying not to be, you know, super obvious and weird about the fact that I'm about to, you know, it's nothing I had eaten or anything like that. So I kind of grab Jay and, you know, he's like, what's wrong? And I'm just like, let's just walk. Like, let's keep going. Like we might need to leave. But here's the thing. As soon as we left that property, I was fine. It was like nothing had happened. I didn't even hear what the ghost story was about because I was so like the whole time. And I mentioned it to Jay. I was like, that was the weirdest thing. Like, I was so sick, but now I'm fine. I thought I'd have to leave the tour or go, like, hurl somewhere. And then the ghost tour guide hears this, and she's like, oh, yeah, that happens a lot. We don't like to say it because we don't want people to feel like they, you know, it's the whole cause and effect, you know, you say. Yeah. So she was like, oh, we don't like to mention it because we don't want it to happen. But, yeah, people do that all the time. I was like, okay. And that's when I was like, this ghost tour is cool. It might be dangerous. Let's do it. So yeah, that's mine. What about yours?
I don't remember the first thing because of course you've got like stuff that I've experienced, stuff that other people have experienced, and then you have pictures that people have taken that they've sent me later. Mm-hmm. I had a friend who was coming into town with his wife who I'd never met. He'd grown up with my younger brother and just reached out to me and said, hey, like, we'd love to go on a ghost tour. And I said, funny you should mention that. I'm giving ghost tours.
Yep.
So I showed him and his wife and a couple of their friends around, and we had gone past the old jail, which is next to the Colonial Park Cemetery. Because everything's just right in that area.
Yep.
and where it's actually a really pretty jail. It's built in the Moorish style. So like the style of it is very pretty, which is weird for a jail. And you've got like the office space, and then you have the space where the jail cells would have been. And that place is a courtyard now. It doesn't have a roof. Where the cells were, you still have the cells. There's just no walkways or gates or anything to connect them. It's just like hollowed out brick, essentially. And you can see through. They've got screens on the other side so that it's not like straight through into the cemetery, but it illuminates the cells a little bit at night. And we were going by, and I said, if anybody wants to take some pictures, you can take some pictures here. And he sent me a picture later where you see what looks like something in one of the old jail cells. And he was like, I don't know what this is. I didn't remember seeing anything at the time. So I went back during the day, found the exact cell that he was taking a picture of, because luckily there's a sign on the other side of the wall that says Savannah College of Art and Design, because SCAD owns it now. So I was able to identify which cell it was based on the sign. And there was nothing there. I thought that maybe like a palmetto plant or something had sprouted there. There's nothing. I went back at night a couple of times to see if there was anything maybe on the other side of the screen that had like shadowed in. Nothing. So I'm not sure what that was, but he got something.
That's like one of the first photos that I ever shared on TikTok was a photo that I eventually went back to and wanted to reanalyze it through something longer than a minute long, and that's when I started doing the YouTube videos. But it's this photo. I remember, the night it was, I don't remember anything else about that tour. I just remember it was the last stop, and I'm standing in front of this old abandoned building, and the new owners had actually gone in and like really made sure that nobody was inside at the time, because at one point homeless people would be there at night. But everything was chained off, roped off, everything like that from all sides. And I ended the tour in front of there. Like I told the whole story, and like people are taking photos as I'm telling the story, which is fine. And I'm accepting tips at that point. And this like teenage kid comes up to me and says, "Hey, I think I caught something." And I was like, "Oh, cool. Let me see the photo." So in the photo, there's this big window behind me, and there I am, like making a weird face because I'm in the middle of talking, right? And behind me, like right here, you could see clearly it was a guy. He was wearing, it's certainly like 18, maybe 80s, maybe earlier than that, but like he has like a tux on, and he's got one of those like little thin ties, and he has like this big hat on, and his face though looked like a skull. Like it was super creepy, and his eyes were hollowed out, and it was just like this white that was coming out of the sockets. And this kid's showing me the photo. I'm still in front of the window, and he's like, "Hey, do you think someone's there? I mean, I see it, but do you?" And I'm sitting there like, "Hey, we're just going to move away. We're just going to go a little bit that way. Like clearly something is there." But it is just a wild photo. And I went back, not that night, but I went back on another night because I was like, I'm just going to let that guy go somewhere and do something else. But no, there was no way that I could explain it. I went back during the daytime. I looked at the window, and like the closest thing coming to an explanation is like the window was broken. Like clearly somebody had done this, and there was like shatters. So what I did for the YouTube video was I basically drew the lines over where the shattered part of the window was. And then I drew an outline of the guy who was apparently hovering in the window, unless he was like 9 feet tall. They did not match up. So I was just like, cool, great. Thanks for showing up that night. Cool.
So apparitions like that, because that reminds me of something that happened here. Do you think that they choose to manifest like looking scary, or is that just an inadvertent thing?
That's a great question, because it really comes down to how aware of themselves that they are. Like, for example, where we're parked right now, there's not a lot of stuff going on. But one of the earlier nights that I was here, I sensed a guy walking behind the bus, and he seemed to be in great distress. So I walked out, and it was clear he had been in some kind of great accident. He was actually, like, this is a spirit, he was actually holding up like part of his head. So I don't think he was projecting himself that way in order to get a scare. I think he didn't know what had happened. And so I found him just like wandering around, and he was just like, I gotta get home. I gotta get home. And so eventually we were like, hey, you don't have to hold your face up anymore. It'll hold itself, my friend. You know, like, that's the kinder way to say it. But yeah, it was more like a, hey, I'm me, your guy from the street, I think about a mile away. Yeah. So in that case, I don't think he was trying to be scary. Certainly people could see that and be like, whoa, that's so gory, I'm so afraid. It may not be about the person witnessing. It could be all about, you know, the person isn't aware, right? We see this around battlefields sometimes. But any kind of sudden rain. It's like all of a sudden, like, any kind of sudden thing, they may not know. The difference is, if you have somebody who understands that they're in spirit and that they no longer have to play to physical rules, that is when they can start to depict themselves a little differently. Now, we'll use George for an example. George will use that to change his outfit according to what season it is or what time of day it is, because that matters to him. Are we surprised? He has quite the wardrobe. I don't know where he keeps it, but he's very aware that he can project himself as fancy as he wants to. But you also get the spirits who want to appear scary and might actually absorb some of that energy by appearing a certain way. And so that's when you get the spirits that are like, oh, I can appear like I don't have skin? Yeah, I'm going to do that. It happens. Like, that happens the same place that I was talking about before, Gallows Hill, all the time. There are skulls that just appear and disappear in the windows. People have seen walking figures, also like skulls and like skeletons. There's like this phantom, like candlelight that people sometimes see from within the house that has no explanation. And we've gone inside and been like, hey, is there a light there? Is there a reflective surface there? No? Okay. Like, I guess that's a candle. But, like, sometimes the candle will show itself and then there'll be, like, a skull in front of it. So, like, you get that backlit skull effect. Like, they know. They know what they're doing. They're trying to scare because, once again, that's energy. Some people get their kicks from the energy of laughter. It's kind of like the Monsters, Inc. theory, you know, like the whole like, oh, we can get the energy from laughter. But some ghosts are like, nah, I hated being here and I'm going to make other people hate being here, and that's what it's going to be.
Because in Savannah, so recently I was talking to two people who I met in Savannah, and they were telling me about experience that they had on a ghost tour, not mine, but they were in Wright Square, and one of them is sensitive. She's always seen spirits her entire life, and they were standing in Wright Square, and the big story with Wright Square, aside from the haunted CVS and the cemetery, is that that was the site of the first public execution for murder in the colony of Georgia. An indentured servant named Alice Riley was put on trial for murdering the man who bought her contract. And there's a lot of speculation as to whether or not she actually did it. Some people think that the other indentured servant that she was put on trial with did it and implicated her. Some people think they did it together. Some people think neither one of them did it and that the murder was just pinned on them, because they were indentured servants and they were Irish and they were Catholic, and, you know, who was going to believe them? So Alice Riley and the other indentured servant, were both found guilty. The other servant was hung. Before they could hang Alice, she said, "Hey, I'm pregnant." So they made her wait in the jail for like 7 or 8 months. And she gave birth to her son. And like hours after she gave birth, she was hung in Wright Square. Which, like, pregnancy is already traumatic. Giving birth is super traumatic. And then being hung on top of that, like, I can't even imagine what she was going through.
Yeah.
And a few weeks later, her son also sadly passed away. So that's like the big story that's always told in Wright Square. And my friend said that she saw Alice and that the guide became aware that Alice was there and said something to kind of egg Alice on. And she said that Alice looked like a perfectly normal human being from that time period. And as soon as the guide started to egg her on, her countenance switched. And she said from the waist down, it was just nothing but a bloody dress.
Yep. That also makes sense for for George. There have been some sensitive people. One of them was like, "Hey, by the way, you're hearing the guy. He knows that you're hearing him, and he's not happy about that. You should go over and say hello." So she was super cool about it. What I loved about her was, like, we went around the tour, and she'd be like, "Is the next story going to be about this?" And, like, at first I was like, "Hey, if you've been on the tour before, maybe not, kill the joke." And she was like, "No, I've never been here before." And I was like, "Oh, you're one of those people. Okay, got it. Just tell me secretly next time instead of, like, saying it that loudly. That'd be cool." But no, there have been people who have seen George as a much scarier fellow. And I think that's because he's that's the thing. George is what he is. He's once again very aware of how he can be perceived. And I'm also in the understanding that if he wants to get someone to be afraid of him, it does not take him even a moment's hesitation to just, do something that would not be great. Somebody told me, they were like, "I saw a man who looked like a skull with a top hat. Was that George?" And I said, "Well, George does not appear that way to me, but I don't know what you said to him." But yeah, and they were just like, "Oh, I don't know. I just went out and started, yapping." I was like, "Yeah, he doesn't like that." You got to warm up. You got to get him to, I tell people, I'm like, if you're going to go see George, if you want him to acknowledge you, put some effort into your appearance. That doesn't mean you have to be gorgeous. That doesn't mean you have to wear something expensive. That means you have to show that you cared enough to do something to your exterior. Like, that is what he is about, and that is what he responds to. I know at the time when he and I started to connect, there was only one guide who would go, and I love the guy. He's a great guy. He doesn't work for the company anymore, but, like, he wasn't doing all the airs to dress up. Like, he had, like, some necklaces, and that was pretty much it. Me, I'm rolling out with, like, feathers in my hair and, like, all the jewelry and stuff like that. And I think that was interesting. Was it stylish? No, but I put a lot of effort into it, and that's what he saw. We have so many people. They're saying hi. Hello, everybody. New Orleans, Houston, Australia. I hope New Orleans is doing all right. Hello from Houston. Oh, somebody says hello from Houston. They probably weren't here earlier.
No. Just because Houston doesn't vibe with me doesn't mean it doesn't vibe with other people. I know plenty of people who love living there.
I do as well. I've been meaning to visit. Hi from Scotland, my people. Hello, everyone. Providence, Liverpool. Cool. Wow, I love this.
I want to answer two people on my end real quick.
Yes, please.
New Jersey History Man. There are so many Civil War ghost stories in Savannah. I don't think we have time for all of them. If you go back and watch some of my videos, I do discuss some of them. And to the person commenting about Alice and why she hasn't moved on, I don't know. I've never tried to contact her personally. A lot of people think that she is still looking for her baby, because when she died, her baby was still alive, and she might not know that her baby's dead.
Yeah. In my experience, sometimes spirits can even learn of something and then forget it. It's kind of like when you go to sleep, if sometimes when you learn something and then you go to sleep, you like remember it super well the next day. But then if it's like
Mm-hmm.
something that you learned a few hours beforehand and like somebody was talking to you and then you go to sleep and then you wake up, you might not remember it. And I know it seems to us in the physical like, oh, why wouldn't you remember what happened to your baby? It's not always the same in the spirit, and time also does not work the same way. So, yeah, unfortunately, especially if somebody's not actively reaching out, I think we in the physical see spirits sometimes as a form of entertainment. You know, we go out and you're like, tell us how you died. And it's like, maybe they don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Or, oh, like, tell us where your baby is. And she might also be like, you tell me where my baby, like, where, yeah, what is going on? But let's say she does know what happened. I'll say rage is another thing that can keep you locked for a little bit. So that might be it. Or she might know she's a ghost and be like, oh, hey, people enjoy when I roll up at night. I'm going to do that for a little bit and be like, hey, everybody, remember me. Ghost stories
And
are a
she's been
way to
spotted.
remember. Yeah.
She's been spotted there a lot, to the point where I've heard stories about the police actually being called because people were like, hey, there's this woman in Wright Square and she keeps asking us where her baby is. And like the police show up and there's nobody there.
And that's so sad. Like, how could those people know, right? They think they're talking to another physical being. Like, clearly she has a lot of energy in order to project herself so strongly. And how sad is it that, the right person, so to speak, was not there at the right time to be like, hi, like, let's have a conversation, like, let's talk about this. So it could be that mixture. It could be the mixture of her not remembering, and it could also be the mixture of her remembering and being angry about it. And either way you look at it, very sad. Very sad. So we've gone over about an hour. I wanted you to put it out there because if it's okay with you, I'd like to post this live on my YouTube, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay, I will tag you
Totally fine.
because I do follow you on YouTube. So if you follow me, you can also find Saltwater Spanish Moss. But where are you? Who are you? Where? Information, please.
Well, on TikTok, I'm Salt Waves and Spanish Moss. On Instagram, I am Edenfield. If you go to my TikTok, all my links are there in my profile. On YouTube, I am Enocha Edenfield. Enocha is spelled Enocha.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. This was so much fun. And
Yeah, it was fun.
yeah, I do look forward to taking your tour and having some fun shenanigans down in Savannah as soon as possible.
Yes.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.